everyone. Welcome to In the Cordon, the place where every cricketer wants to be. I'm your host, Callum, and thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we're going to be talking about the second test match between India and England, which was played in Vizag. And joining me to talk about all the action is regular panelist Louie Stade. Louie, how are you, mate?
Going very well. I think I've had enough of listening to Kevin Peterson on the mic, but I'm always happy to sit here and talk with you, Callum.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. He's had some very interesting moments in 2023 on the mic with the Ashes, but certainly a lot of action in Vizag where India were able to win the second test match. And I actually thought it was a really good game of test cricket. I suppose there was a good chance in the fourth innings that England were going to be able to chase this down, but as we've seen in this series, when you're able to take, two or three wickets in a cluster, it really sort of opens the game up. But I actually don't think England did too much wrong in this game. I just think there were two really outstanding performances from Jaiswal, who made a double century, as well as Jasprit Bumrah, who took 6 wickets in the first innings and 9 for the game. That really sort of broke this game open. And I think if England had batted first, this result could have been entirely different. But what did you make of the test match overall?
Yeah, look, it was actually, to be fair, probably a more even test match than perhaps it will look if you just, scanning the scorecard. But, I had a couple of interesting notes from this one. One was, I think it was in the first test, the ball was really hard to bat against when it was firm and quite easy to bat against when it softened up. In this test match, it was almost the opposite. And if you look at the distribution of runs, a lot of them were coming up the top order for both teams. So I think that kind of shows certainly, Bumrah and Anderson, showing their class as far as ability to extract wickets on decks that aren't necessarily traditionally favourable. This is just another kind of arrow in the bow of when you look at Jasprit Bumrah, and statistically his career won't stack up whenever he's done because of injuries and all the like. But I think as far as guys you wouldn't want to have to face in all conditions, he's right up there. And then from a batting perspective, if I go through it, I think for as good as Jaiswal was, and obviously he's got a tremendous career in front of him, and Gill making that comeback 100 when the media is saying he was basically told it was his last chance is great. I think India have actually got to be quite concerned by their batting outside of those two. India are, I'm going to say, doing their best. There's a couple of guys I think that have some shots they might want to think twice about, but it's certainly not what we're used to in this kind of home series for India, where it's make 150 runs consistently more than the opposition and then just have the spinners go to work. But that being said, to me, this is Jaiswal, this is Bumrah, this is, two players taking the game away from England.
Yeah, there were certainly a lot of positive signs from an English perspective, and we're going to look into those. And I actually thought the spinners in Bashir and Rahul Ahmed, they did quite well considering that they've only played, 4 test matches between the two of them. And Hartley obviously, did very well in the first test match, but he wasn't as dominant in this particular game. But I thought Bashir, for a 20-year-old who's, I suppose, had a troublesome tour, early parts of the tour, he's certainly impressed. He bowls with a high release point. He's able to seriously spin the ball, and I thought his accuracy was pretty spot on. And statistically, leg spinners haven't done as well in the subcontinent. We've seen Australia be very reluctant to play someone like Mitch Swepson on their recent tour to India, based on statistics that have sort of happened recently. But I thought for Rahul Ahmed, who's 18, 19, I thought he bowled really well. Short, he legged a few boundaries at times, but, you bowled a lot of leg spin in your career, Louis, and it's a very hard skill to master. But I think Rahul Ahmed certainly got a long future for English cricket. So what did you make of the England spinners in particular?
Yeah, look, Bashir, and it's interesting, they basically said they picked him because he looks like he's going to be a decent bowler. And I think Alistair Cook, who played against him in a county game, raved about him. And the statistics aren't impressive, right, in a first-class sense. But you mentioned it. He gets really good work on the ball. It's the same thing that I liked about when I first saw Todd Murphy, similar, where the shape, the seam position, it's all there. It's all indicating he's not an easy guy to face. What his career is outside of the subcontinent, it's too early to say. His accuracy was both better than I was expecting, but also he'll probably need to be a touch tighter if he's going to play a lot of cricket in the UK. But I think that was an inspired selection, much like Hartley in the first test. And at this point in time, the England selectors are looking decent with their kind of shot in the dark selections, let's call it that. Rayan Ahmed, you're right. Leg spin traditionally in India hasn't been, necessarily as effective as you'd think. I think the one thing that goes in his favour is let's be honest, he's a googly bowler, right? He's not a traditional leg spinner in that sense. And there have been guys that have succeeded in India or the subcontinent conditions with that being their main weapon. There's been series certainly where guys like Imran Tahir or Adil Rashid have been threatening in those conditions sporadically. So I think because he's a bit unorthodox, I can see this continuing to work in India. I still have questions again about what he'll be like outside of those conditions. But certainly from England's perspective, all three of the spinners plus Leach they've now taken on this tour have shown something in the first two games. Joe Root was a non-factor bowling-wise this game as well, which did put a bit more pressure back on these young spinners.
Yeah, it was. It'll be very interesting to see what they decide to do for team selection in the next game. Something that Rayan Ahmed certainly has in his advantage is his ability to bat at number 8. But we sort of thought at the end of the first Test match that Rayan Ahmed would play this game, and if he didn't do as well, with Leach's injury, then that would be the swap for the third Test match. But it will be very interesting to see whether they stick with Tom Hartley or whether they look to swap Jack Leach, because I certainly think that you do need to have as many options to spin the ball away from the bat as we've seen in the past. That's something that Australia made the mistake of in their Test match series, where they played both Lyon and Todd Murphy in the same game and not having the option to spin the ball away from the right-hander. So, I think England's selections have been pretty good this tournament, and someone who's done actually quite well in this particular game was Zach Crawley. I think because he's tall, he's able to get a lot further down the wicket. And when he did hit boundaries and Rohit Sharma certainly put the fielders back, that's where he was able to really rotate the strike and get those singles. And another player that you mentioned who's done really well for England in this Test match was Jimmy Anderson. I'd expect them to stick with him for the rest of the series, unless he, pulls up sore between Test matches and there's a short turnaround. But I thought the two of them were pretty impressive in this game. What did you make of those two in particular?
Certainly impressed by Crawley. I think this is the innings that has showed me the most class as far as his Test career, and that's not criticism of the hundreds he's hit, outside of this kind of area. But I know he can get on the front dog and just plaster guys all around the UK if the conditions suit. I think that he was someone that I thought was a bit wooden in his batting, and so it actually shocked me that he was kind of able to adjust here to I'd say a set of conditions that don't come naturally to him. It bodes well. Matt Hayden started his career looking a bit kind of stiff against spin and kind of grew into one of the better players of spin. And, hopefully this is the start of something for Crawley. There's enough there to think that he's got a chance to continue to contribute in this series. I think Jimmy Anderson will rest at some other point in this series again, but I thought he was fantastic. So certainly from England's perspective, there's plenty to like there.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And one thing that I did want to talk about would be, what does India do with their selection? Because as we've sort of touched on in this series, India have been there's been one or two players who have really performed, and then the other guys have kind of just been strung along. And I think someone who is seriously under pressure is Sheryas Iyer. He's got in, he's had starts, but he just hasn't been able to kick on like we've seen Jaiswal in this particular game, and Shubman Gill as well, who, hit a really good 100 under extreme pressure. And if it wasn't for his partner telling him to review that one, he could have potentially been out of the side. But Sheryas Iyer was a player that we certainly think he's got a lot of talent. He's been around this team for the last 2 years. 2.5 years. But I think he's someone who's significantly under pressure. And the other person who I think is under immense pressure is Rohit Sharma. The captain's 37. I love Rohit Sharma as a player. I think he's been a fantastic servant for Indian cricket. But I'm certainly worried about his longevity, particularly with tours to Australia coming up. As well as, a potential tour to England. I don't know if he makes it to that England tour in 2025, but he's someone that's certainly under pressure. What would you make of, Ayers and Sharma's place in the side, particularly with Rahul expected to come back and Virat Kohli to come back at some point too.
It does sound to me like Kohli's unlikely to be back for this Test match. Just reading the tea leaves, I think Rahul, totally different situation. My gut feel is that I will be the one that will probably go before Sharma, and that isn't necessarily a performance thing. That is, I think that I'm not sure India are necessarily wanting to have an immediate change in captain. I also think that if they can remain in control of this series, captains tend to get a little bit of a longer rope as long as they're winning. I think all the points you raise about Sharma for a tour to Australia, for a tour to the UK, it's valid. I just think where Indian cricket's at the moment, they're in a transition phase. I think they need as many senior players around this group as possible. Obviously, when Kohli comes back, that will also kind of amp up the pressure a little bit, but he is looking out of touch. My thing with Sheryas Iyer is I keep him on a much shorter rope than other guys, and it's because I don't rate him outside of the subcontinent. And I think if you're going to be a bit of a specialist, you have to deliver big in the environments you're meant to be specialising in. So for me, he's probably the one that's going to go first. And obviously, I expect they will continue to make changes with their bowling lineup, both through injuries and also just kind of rotating based on the conditions. So yeah, I would look to see that it's probably Sharma's probably got the rest of the series. Everyone else, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I'd certainly expect KL Rahul to come back for the next Test match. Whether Jadeja's fit or not is a different story, but I would be expecting Mohammad Siraj to come back in place of Kumar. Or if Jadeja's fit and they decide they only want to go with one seamer, keeping Kuldeep in the side would be something that I would really like to see. But it will certainly depend on the pitch in Ranjkot. So that will be something to see. One thing I did want to ask you about was the DRS. A lot's been made from the England camp about the decision, particularly against Zach Crawley. When I saw it live, I didn't think it was going to be out. I thought it'd be umpire's call at best. But what did you make of that particular decision? Because it was so pivotal in that point of the game.
Look, my gut feel is the same as yours. Is it probably should have been umpire's call at the same point in time. I think that if it's that close that you can split a needle like that at the end of the day, pre-DRS, no one would have questioned that twice if that was given, right? As in you would have gone, okay, 50-50, it's been given out. I think that I definitely do agree that I'm not sure that blaming the technology is not necessarily the issue. I think it's the way they use the cameras for the technology that often causes these issues. And when you're recognising points of impact, I've seen some interesting pieces about how he bowls close to the stumps and that sort of thing. The only comment I would have is that I think I didn't like the comments coming from England after the game about it. At the end of the day, I agree. It probably should have been given not out. But I think I'm growing a little bit tired of this England team and everything else that doesn't go right for them being an excuse and everything that does go right being all hail Bazball.
Well, Louis, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for on this edition of In the Cordon. Just wanted to say a big thank you for coming on today's episode. So make sure you follow In the Cordon on all of your major social media pages, and we'll see you for our coverage of the third Test match between India and England. Cheers.